Hey, how are you? It is Wednesday, 21st of September 2022. It's Notcast 235. There are still some records in my record collection I haven't talked about, and that is going to be one of the things I'm talking about today. The Manic Street Preachers' sixth studio album, released in 2001, Know Your Enemy, which got a handy expanded and remixed reissue last week as Door to the River and Solidarity. This is a pretty weird and interesting period of time for the band. I think all periods of time are interesting, of course, because I have to live through them. There's a lot going on, and I'm going to be talking about the record and what happened in my life between the release of the Masses Against the Classes single on the 10th of January in the year 2000 through to the end of this album period, which was with its last live show, which was September the 12th, 2001. A day that was historic in many ways, a quite unusual kind of period of time of world history to live through. So I'm also going to talk about the passing of time is a really strange thing, because to my mind, this feels like one of the later Manics albums. I've been a Manics fan for 11 years when this came out, so I came into liking the band around about 1991, maybe late 1990. And to me, this is one of their later records, although it is now 21 years ago, which seems bizarre and strange. 21 years, it seems to have gone in the blink of an eye. There is a theory that as you get older, life speeds up, because proportionally you're living shorter periods of your life. Like when I was about 14, 6 weeks in school holiday was like 100th of my life, and it felt like it lasted forever. So 1% of my life to that point had been a school holiday, whereas now 6 weeks is, sometimes that's the gap between payday and payday during the Christmas period, when perhaps you get paid a little before Christmas, and then you end up January feels like it's got about 4,000 days in it. So time is a strange thing. And know Your Enemy. This whole period is a very unusual one for me as a fan, and my experiences going through it. And I'm going to be unambiguous about that, I think. I have conflicted feelings. The period started off with the release of the Manic's last #1 single, Masses Against the Classes. Back to the new track called Close My Eyes, and a cover version of that good old rock and roll music that's made famous by the Beatles band that you may have heard of. It came out on a limited edition 10-inch and a CD there with what I think that's a Cuban flag, actually, I think, on that. And I loved this record when it came out. As you'd seen from the previous episode when I talked about This Is My Truth, I found the Manics during this period, it felt to me that the band had become diluted and just weren't as good as they once were. The sense that the music was being made because it was screaming out of the band and it had to be made and had to be listened to. It started to be replaced slowly and slowly by the idea of, well, we're a band and we write songs and we play songs, and that is the thing that we do. And it became less attractive as a fan to be into a band that at one point had come racing out of the gates, that they were compelled to make this amazing music. And then by the time you get to 10, 20 years in, it's like, well, it's just another bloody single, isn't it? How many singles have the Manics released? Can anyone remember? Does anyone care? I don't know. 60, 70? How many albums are on that? 15? It's a lot. And by the time you get to your 15th record and your 180th song on an album, you kind of go, what's the point? How many times can you say certain things? Brian Ferry said at a certain point he stopped, writing songs because there's only many songs about being married to a supermodel and swimming pools and fast cars that you can write. Well, I'd love to find out, but you can write about other things. And the Masses Against the Classes to me felt like a shot in the arm and a breath of fresh air to a band that had become tired and had become predictable. And I think I read someone describe it as the band playing the same songs to a different set of strangers every night, which was obviously what playing a gig is. It had become a little bit formulaic. So when I first heard the Mass Against Classes, which was when it was performed live at V99 in Stafford in August 1999, it just felt as if the band had been reborn. They'd got that sense of anger back. Now, This Is My Truth is an album that to me is a concept album about inertia, it's about depression, it's about um, the kind of the soft numbness of depression where it kind of curls in on itself and everything becomes very flat. Masters Against the Classes felt to me that it turned that sense of inward inertia into an outward loathing, and anger. And sadness and anger, I think, sometimes are two very close things, because you've got a sense of sadness, and the sadness is around wanting to make things better, wanting to improve things, wanting to change things. And perhaps sadness comes from not being able to change things. So, a death, a bereavement, something like that. That's where I think the sadness comes from. And then aggression and anger comes from the fact that you're angry that you can't change things. So they're two different approaches, two sides to the same coin. Well, I don't know if that's true or not. That's my approach. Probably someone could do a research ink blot test of that and go, "Hey, Mark, you're a psychopath," and be like, "No, I don't think so." If you're a psychopath, you don't give a shit whether you're a psychopath or not. If you aren't, you kind of like, "I'm worried that I am." So there you go. The Masses Against the Classes, the non-album single from this era, made an appearance on the Forever Delayed compilation Best of Hits album from 2002, but has never sat on a Manic's album proper until the 2022 reissue expanded version of Know Your Enemy, which came out technically less than 2 weeks ago. So it ends, by the way, it opens with a quote from I think Noam Chomsky, which is: "The country was founded on the principle that the primary role of government is to protect property from the majority, and so it remains." And then ends on a screamed quote from James Dean Bradfield, going, "The slave begins by demanding justice and ends by wanting to wear a crown." That quote has been taken off the 2022 remix of the song in the year, and that was released it was #1 for a week. It was deleted the week it came out, and the band were then very quiet, which is understandable. They just finished an 18-month touring cycle for the This Is My Truth album. They just were finalising the Leaving the 20th Century DVD, and that album had come to a close. And when an album comes to a close, what happens next? New songs. You record the new songs. Eventually, you release new songs. And the first fruits of the new songs were released on the 26th of February 2001. 2 singles simultaneously that reflected the 2 different sides of the band. The first one is Found That Soul, which was released as a 7-inch and a CD single in the UK. And then the second one was So Wise, So Sad, the song that perhaps got a slightly better and bigger response from the charts. But neither of them hit the kind of levels in the charts that you would have expected from a band that had #1s or #2s with the preceding singles from the last 2 albums and the standalone single. And I think part of that came from the sense of confusion. Is people going, "Well, why are the band releasing two songs on the same day, 2 separate singles? Why are they doing that?" Part of it was going, well, are they confused? Do they know what single they want to release? It felt like they were running 2 simultaneous campaigns for 2 albums, but only 1 album was released. And of the 2 singles, the one which I think immediately kind of leapt out to me was Found That Soul. By the way, I should say the graphic design in this period is quite upsetting, because I am a format snob, and if you look at it, then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 5 lines there, there's 6 words, and they break the words. The kerning is out, and it is disgraceful, and it makes my eyes hurt. The thought that perhaps you couldn't just put Manic Street Preachers, and then you could put Found That, and then Soul there, or Found, and then That Soul there. It just looks bad. Sorry, guys. I hate breaking words in them when it comes to line breaks. I am visually kind of offended by that. Although, obviously, being offended by something is no big deal. I spend like next to no time actually thinking about the kerning on that. But it just looks wonky and weird, and it plays with my sense of order. And Found That Soul, by the way, I think it's an ideal first choice for a single from the album. I listened to Found That Soul and I thought, oh, this is it. They've got it back. Very, very promising. And there's the 7-inch, which is back with the Masses Against the Classes live in the Cardiff Millennium Stadium there. And then there is the CD single, which is back with 2 new B-sides called Locust Valley and the Ballad of the Bangkok Novotel, presumably written about the band's stay in Bangkok in 1994 at the end of the Gold Against the Soul and start of the Holy Bible era of the band. And I think the ethos of the period actually is summed up by the quote that's on the inside of the CD single here, which is, our life is frittered away by details. Simplify, 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 by Henry David Thoreau there. And that kind of sums up what the band were trying to do. Is, to an extent, they'd become very big, very popular, very complex. They'd become, whether they liked it or not, businessmen in charge of £1 million industry. They had, dozens of employees on any given day. They were playing to 10,000 people a night on the arena tour. The Manics were a big band at this point. They were not a niche thing. They were, up there with one of the biggest rock bands of the time. And people weren't there, and I don't want to mansplain you about this, but it's easy to forget that. It's easy to forget that the Manics weren't a band that played 2,000 people town halls. The Manics weren't always a band that got to number 10 in the charts or didn't have hit singles. The Manics were at one point a number one band, a huge act, headlined a stadium, for God's sake. They were a big band, and it kind of just disappeared away from them. Being successful is something that some bands have for a short period of time. Neil Tennant called it the imperial phase. There is a period of time when any band that is famous becomes famous for a period of time. They're invincible. You can throw anything at them and it will bounce off like batfink. But for the Manics, this album, this campaign, this artistic statement was the start of the slip from the top. And sometimes you can look at it and go, well, actually, when a band's absolutely huge, that's actually the outlier. That's not what the band is. It's a moment where actually what the band was doing and what society and culture was doing aligned. And sometimes a band gets that for 5 months. Sometimes a band gets it for 5 years. Sometimes they get it for 50 years. Most bands, if you're successful, if you get 1 or 2 singles that you can then make a career out of, you're doing better than 99.9% of all of the bands on the planet will ever do, let alone be able to sustain it for 30 years. The second single was So Why, So Sad. And yes, this has sleigh bells on it, which is an unusual thing. Something I never thought I'd actually say on a Manic single, but there you are. And this is a more kind of layered, elegiac, almost celebratory song with a very unusual video. And it's backed with a remix of So Why So Sad by the Australian band Avalanches, a track called Pedestal, which by the way has one of the best snare drum sounds you will ever hear, and a live track which is, I think, You Stole the Sun From My Heart, live at the Millennium Stadium as the band were leaving the 20th century. That's the European CD single. The UK CD single only has 3 tracks because thanks to formatting rules, CD singles and singles in the UK were limited to either a maximum of 4 remixes of one song or 3 original songs. So the days of having 4 B-sides were pretty much long gone. But So Why So Sad there, sleigh bells, perhaps not the finest Manic single, but people were looking at it and going, well, I'm confused. Which one does the band want to do? Which one is the sound of the band? Is it the rocky sound of that Find That Soul, or is it the more sleigh bell kind of stadium rock sound of So Why So Sad? And what it did, it confused people in the same way that the release of Use Your Illusions 1 and 2 on the same day confused people. There's only so much space people have in their brains for this kind of information. And if bands make it more complicated than it needs to be, people are just going to go, yeah, because there's 1,000 other bands which will be interested in your attention that aren't going to make it quite so difficult. And I think bands sometimes forget that. If you go away for a decade, Axl Rose, I'm talking to you, it's completely normal that people are going to forget who you are and what you do, and to sit there and go, well, why aren't I still headlining stadium? It's like, dude, you took like 16 years off. Um, you know, your fans have grown up, they've got mortgages, they've got kids, they've got cars and pension plans and jobs and all that type of stuff. There's only so much space. So if you want to be a huge and successful artist, you can't be making life too complicated. And of course, with the release of Know Your Enemy, the Manics made life quite complicated. Also, I should point out, by the way, again, the kerning on this is it really upsets me because, again, it doesn't make sense. There should be Manic Street Preachers, and then know your enemy. There you are, and that would work. But no, it doesn't work. It looks squashed, and especially when you look at this here, the LP sleeve on the back, and again, lots of empty space. It's kind of difficult to work out what's going on with it. The songs, then the vinyl edition, by the way, this is one of the 2010 versions of the album, which was on Music on Vinyl, replicates to every extent, apart from the copyright notices, the original LP release, which is of course staggeringly expensive because nobody was buying vinyl in those days. But what we did have is we had a quiet LP with, I think, about over half an hour on each side of the LP, and it just felt a little weird and a little difficult and a little complex, and I'm not sure it really worked. Obviously, for the Know Your Enemy reissue a couple of weeks ago, it's been broken into two parts. Know Your Enemy, two albums. Some of the B-sides have been integrated back into the original track listing. But for this, it felt like a schizophrenic LP. It felt like two albums stuffed into one box, and you're kind of going, well, which Manics are you going to get? Are you going to get the aggressive Gold Against the Soul Generation Terrorist rock band? Are you going to get the stadium version of Everything Must Go? How is it going to work? And of course, on the 19th of March 2001, the album was released. We stuck it into our shiny CD players because only about 4 people bought the vinyl edition, and our minds were blown by what we heard because whatever it wasn't what we were expecting. Of course, people that like bands that release 2 albums at the same point, Metallica's Load and Reload, Guns N' Roses' Use Your Illusion, parts 1 and 2, and later on the Manics with Rewind the Film and Futurology, for example, is that there'll always be a discussion about, well, what if it was only one album? What would the track listing be for that? How would that work? And of course, Know Your Enemy is your answer. What if it was only one album? And then that's what it would look like, is it would look like this, and it would be a stuffed, verbose 17-song LP that runs to something like 65 minutes or 70 minutes. In any other world, it would be a double LP, and of course, the reissue is the double LP version of it. But it's an album that has 2 very distinct flavours, and it's very difficult to work out what it is. It opens with Found That Soul, which is an aggressive, assertive, rocky kind of Stooges, raw power type yelp. Found That Soul, sorry, is a snarling, barking, angry dog of a song, and it's very clear. It doesn't really tell you what it's clear about, but it's assertive, and it tells you that it's taking no prisoners. And then you follow it up with the second single, which is Ocean Spray. And Ocean Spray, by the way, is, in my opinion, I think one of the finest Manic singles that there is. It's the first one where the lyrics have been written by James Dean Bradfield. Very, very personal song. So if you don't live in the UK, at the time, Ocean Spray was a cranberry flavoured drink, and it was almost a bit of advertising, but it was a very different song than Found That Soul or So Why So Sad. In another world, of course, Ocean Spray would have been the first single, and the world may have been very, very different. But Ocean Spray is the song that the best way to describe it would be the kind of Kevin Carter or the Enola Alone of the album. It's a very accessible song, whereas Found That Soul and So Why So Sad are very definitely the 2 flip sides of it. One is the harsh snarling monster, and the other one is the gentle stadium caress. The first time I saw the band in 2001 was for a filming for CD UK at the South Bank studios of ITV, which I think have now been demolished or have now been turned into something else. And they played I think Found That Soul and So Why So Sad, and they played I think they played Motown Junk as well, actually. and one of those songs was broadcast on television, and I was 26 at the time, and I felt that I was probably at the upper limit of the age range of the people that they'd invite to go to the filming. I did feel older than a lot of people that were there, and I kind of realized, yeah, pop is a young person's game. If you didn't already know it, it definitely was. And I felt that I was starting to age out of being connected to what's in the chart. I mean, obviously these days you could tell me who's number one and be going, I didn't even know that was a band. What's music anymore? I only like bands that formed when I had a full head of hair. Those type of things. Whereas at that point, that was the first time when I went to the filming of that, and I felt that I very definitely felt older than I had done. Whereas before, I felt that I was younger, and I was connected to culture. At this point, there were things happening in culture that were passing me by because I was getting older. I had shit on my mind. I had stuff to worry about. And I wasn't necessarily that interested or that connected to what was going on. Who's the latest band which has been hyped that's going to disappear in 6 weeks' time? Who cares? But I saw the Manics play Fan That Soul and So Why So Sad and Motown Junk to a TV studio of 125 people. And that was the first time that I saw them after Stafford V99 Festival. And it felt like a longer 18 months than it actually was, I think it's fair to say. But they didn't play Ocean Spray. I don't think they played it for CD UK, but Ocean Spray being the second single. The lyric to Ocean Spray, by the way, is very personal. It was written by James Dean Bradfield around the death of his mother. And as somebody whose mother is not immortal, was not immortal, I very definitely have that sense of understanding that she would say, please stay and drink some Ocean Spray because it apparently had antioxidants in or something, and she thought it might help. And the idea of just sitting there and watching somebody that you love as the life slowly slips away from them, and there's nothing that you can do to help that, is heartbreakingly sad to experience. Hopefully you will never experience that, but if you don't experience that, you may not have any loved ones or family. It's just that's the way it is, isn't it? Track 3 is Intravenous Agnostic, which surprisingly has been played live in an acoustic format. Intravenous Agnostic is a monster. It's you're already starting to see that the track listing for the album is very definitely of two distinct personalities. One fierce, angry, outward looking. The other one is more melancholic, more inward, more resigned. Intravenous Agnostic is very definitely in the first part. And Intravenous Agnostic, by the way, has its place as the opening track on the CD 2 of this, our reissue, Solidarity, which is the harder end of the record. And the interesting thing with Intravenous Agnostic, by the way, is, and the lyrics are one hell of a mouthful on that song, is that it almost feels like Nicky Wire is trying to break language and coherency to create a stream of consciousness, kind of vomiting forth of ideas and lyrics that you can just about kind of follow the sense of what those words are and how they connect to each other and the things. But there are some big logical leaps that are being made in these songs. So the lyrical direction that the album has changed completely from the previous album, This Is My Truth. This Is My Truth, of course, being around depression and inertia and that numbness. This is about Nicky Wire in his retreating to the bottom of his garden, isolating away from the rest of the outside world because there's nothing nice in my head. The adult world took it all away, and creating their own universe, their own planet upon which you can exist. Of course, if you don't have to engage with the outside world, and the outside world being flawed and corrupt, then you're automatically at an advantage from other people that don't have that luxury. If you have to interact with the outside world, if you have to perform rituals that you find absurd in order to fit into a society that you don't like and don't understand, the concept of having to be part of that society and being forced to wear a mask upon your own and pretend to tolerate ideas that you find laughable, such as the monarchy, or to have to operate in a structure and an economic fashion that perhaps you think is completely unconscionable and indefensible, i.e. capitalism. The ability to be able to separate yourself from that is the necessary retreat that you need because I'm very firmly of the view that modern society is psychopathic in terms of how it has its morality and its base and its structure and its values, and having to interact with that is something that you have to be very astute about, because you remember the cliche about somebody that was bitten by the fox, and the fox goes, "Hey, I told you I was a fox." Society is a fox; it will bite you, and it will tell you that it will bite you, and there's nothing you can do about that. So being able to retreat from that is something which, the ultimate sanction of anybody is withdrawal, and a huge chunk of Know Your Enemy is Nicky Wire about exploring the idea of withdrawing from a society that feels poisonous, in my opinion. And it's obviously it's a song that Intravenous Agnostic is a song that kind of talks about that, and about having, what do I believe in, what do I have faith in, what do I trust, what institutions do I trust, what structures do I trust anything, or do I trust nothing? Track 4 is So Why So Sad. Of course you all have heard about that, because that's the single, and it's got sleigh bells. On the reissue version of Know Your Enemy, the definitive album version of So Why So Sad is in fact the Avalanches remix, and the Avalanches remix is different, it's bigger, it's more conventional, less sleigh bell-ish, if that's a word. It's got a different arrangement with more space and more air in it. I prefer, actually, my ideal version of So Why So Sad doesn't exist, because it's a 7-inch edit of the Avalanches mix, but you can't have it all, although some of it would be nice. Track 5, single 3 from the LP, by the way, and this is an unusual release. Let Robeson Sing. Let Robeson Sing is the third single from the album, and I think it's the closest and most obvious thing that we have on the record to a standard stadium rock ballad. It's absolutely fantastic, of course, by the way. Let Robeson Sing, inspired by the singer Paul Robeson, and about how he sang the songs that he felt were true and honest to himself, even if they did come at personal cost. So, for example, there's a line in Let Robeson Sing, "No passport until 1958, which is driven by the fact that in 1950, when he tried to renew his passport, I think the American Passport Office tried to get him to sign an affidavit saying that he would not make any speeches about America or the world or anything. Otherwise, his passport wouldn't be issued. And he refused to sign that, because he said, it's Constitution, free country, etc. Why can't I be who I want to be? Why can't I say what I want to say? And there was a court case, and the Supreme Court ruled that actually it was unconstitutional to withhold from an American citizen the right to a passport, or to make the issue of a passport conditional on agreements to behaviour, which wouldn't have bound other people. So, for example, if they'd have said to, let's say, I don't know, Elvis, you can't have a passport unless you agree not to make any speeches about the nature of society, Elvis would have gone, oh, but it would have been unconstitutional, or a violation of the civil rights that they have. And of course, freedom of speech won't feed my children. It just brings heart disease and bootleg clothing, to quote the closing track on the album. But freedom of speech is not freedom of consequence, but freedom of consequence is to be controlled by the state in a way in which was unconstitutional, was ruled to be against it. So Robeson got his passport in 1958, and there is, of course, the quote here on the CD single, which is, "The artist must elect to fight for freedom or slavery. I have made my choice. I had no alternative." And it's an important statement, and one which actually I think Let Robeson Sing is the undiscovered classic of this album. It's a phenomenal song, and I saw them play it relatively recently, and I thought, it's great. Why don't they play it at every show? It's just one of the best Manic songs that there is, I think. And there's obviously Paul Robeson on the cover of the 2 CD singles, and here is the Ian Brown remix of Let Robeson Sing as a promotional CD single. And I have to tell you, the Ian Brown remix is bloody awful, and it features an ill-advised rap by Ian Brown about the merits of being a Manic Street preacher, rocking the mic in Havana. I listened to that remix actually for the first time in about 20 years today, and I can't believe how bad it was. Maybe not quite up there with, I don't know, actually it might be one of the worst raps of all time, up there with Mr. C's version of Coming On by The Shaman. which I think the rap is pretty bad on that. So, back to Know Your Enemy. Track 6 is The Year of Purification. And The Year of Purification is one of the fastier rocker tracks on there. So you kind of think every time that you get, the songs are kind of in, the two albums are interwoven inside each other. When you think of Know Your Enemy as actually being two records, you listen to it and you can clearly see that there are two schizophrenic or alternative identities that are battling through supremacy on this record to see which one will win. And in the end, nobody wins and everybody wins. And The Year of Purification is just one of those songs. Now, The Year of Purification is inspired by a book by Barry McSweeney called The Book of Demons. And it comes from, again, that quote about simplify, simplify, simplify. The idea is that you reduce your life to the component parts that exist within it so that you have less in the way of extra things occupying your time and your brain space, so that you can concentrate on what you really need to concentrate on. 7 is the first Nicky Wire vocal on any Manic Street Preachers album, Wattsville Blues. Wattsville being, I think, part of or a suburb of the town in Wales where he lives, and it takes a really curious, because all of a sudden you think, well, okay, the Manics have one singer, he's really bloody good, he can play guitar, he's fantastic at it. And then Richie obviously doesn't sing, Nicky sings, and he's not technically the best singer, is probably the best way of putting it. The voice has got a lot of personality, and personality, by the way, super, super important. I have been watching for my sins occasionally things like, I don't know, The Voice or whatever the program is on television, where people sing, and is it Tom Jones and will.i.am and somebody else, and they press a button and they turn around and they see who's singing. And there's a couple of times when I watch it and go, yeah, their voice is fantastic, but there's no personality in that voice. There's nothing in that voice that tells me that that voice belongs to them, in the way that if you listen to somebody like Adele, Amy Winehouse, even Mariah Carey or Whitney Houston or whoever, technically great singers, but also personality. You can listen to them and the way that they use their phrasing and their diction and the tone and timbre of their voice. Nobody else can do it. But then you think about Adam Lambert, sorry Adam, singing Queen songs, technically very good, but the voice doesn't have the force of personality within it to make me think that is the guy that wrote the songs. It could be anybody with a good voice. Whereas Nicky Wire doesn't have a good voice. Or certainly didn't at this point. Didn't let that stop him from singing. And then we've got track 8, which is Miss Europa Disco Dancer, which I think closes side 1 of the LP, running at over half an hour. Miss Europa Disco Dancer was only played live in 2001, not at every show. I saw the Manics play it, I think, 5 times on that tour, so I saw 7 shows in 2001. And it's really strange because it had James was on bass, and Nicky was on guitar and singing, and James had a double neck guitar, 1 bit bass, 1 bit guitar, so he could switch between the 2 bits as and when he needed to. And Miss Europa Disco Dancer, by the way, closes the second of the 2 albums on Know Your Enemy, the Solidarity album, and it's a perfect place for that. It's a great song because it sounds really weird. It sounds good. You listen to it, and if somebody said, this is the Manics, you go, no, it sounds like some lost ABBA song. It's got big sweeping strings, a funky bass line. It just doesn't sound like the Manic Street Preachers at all. In fact, lots of this album doesn't sound like the Manic Street Preachers at all. And that's a really curious position to be in as a band. We have Dead Martyrs, which opens side 2 of the LP. Track 10 on Solidarity. And it's a good song, but it's 1 song too many on the album. And Dead Martyrs is followed by His Last Painting, and His Last Painting is again a song that feels its very definition of an album cut. I don't think they've played it live. I don't think anyone will put it in their top 10 Manic songs. It's a very adequate song, certainly compared to something like You're Tender and You're Tired, or I'm Not Working. His Last Painting is a work of deathless genius, up there with Kill Uncle. But overall, that and My Guernica and The Convalescent and The Royal Correspondent, the next 3 or 4 songs, are the very definition of mid-album inertia even. So obviously CD bloat in the 90s and parts of the noughties, you could get 79 minutes of music on a CD. Some bands saw that not as a limit but as a target, and they wrote music to fill the expanded to fill the available space, and sometimes some of those songs should have been B-sides. The Convalescent, The Royal Correspondent, My Guernica, His Last Painting. These are B-sides which have been promoted to album status. And on a different configuration of an album with a different track listing and a different personality, sure, they'd be absolutely great, they'd do the job, but they are not great album tracks at all. And you know, the Convalescent, for example, actually I'm skipping ahead a song. My Guernica follows His Last Painting. My Guernica is takes its title from, or inspiration from, Picasso's painting Guernica, the famous one. So His Last Painting is about being an artist that's trying to translate the world that they see and converting it into art. My Guernica perhaps takes that theme one step further and explicitly identifies a work by Picasso. But then you've got the flip side of that. And as I've said before, some parts of the album are facing outwards and angry, some parts are facing inwards. The Convalescent is exactly the song where the album starts to turn inwards and on the self. And it's almost around a sense of exhaustion and emptiness. It's a thematic sequel to what's on This Is My Truth. And it's okay, but it's nothing more than okay. Track 4, side 2, is Royal Correspondent, which is not on the lineups for the 2022 reissue. And to me, having just come out of 11 days of gaslit mourning as a result of the death of Queen Elizabeth II and her replacement by King Charles III, where television has been monopolised by repetitive, one-dimensional mourning of an extremely old, rich woman dying, I have felt very clearly that, you know, that sense of deference, that sense of subservience, that sense of duty, and you know, the Royals are fantastic, they're doing a thing that they've never been asked to do, they've been forced to do it, aren't they brilliant, while they're living in gilded palaces, and the vast inequalities that exist around them. It feels to me that I've been living in an alien country for the past 11 days. I'm not a royalist at all, and when, you know, people talk about cancel culture, if you're a Republican in the past 2 weeks in the UK, you will have been a victim of cancel culture, because you will have been seen as almost traitorous to suggest the idea that maybe the royal family aren't that amazing. They aren't that amazing, and we all know that, or at least we've got to respect the view that some people might not think they're amazing. But there was no space for any dissent whatsoever in culture in the past 2 weeks. We were, you know, comedy was outlawed, so comedy gigs weren't meant to happen. Some rock shows were cancelled. People were, yeah, all televised comedy was pulled. The news was basically a constant rolling 24-hour parade of misery and grief, because the Queen had died, and for people that aren't royalists, it's bizarre. I did really feel like Johnny Rotten in that footage on the boat in the Jubilee. Where'd you ever feel like you've been trapped? I was trapped in a country I didn't recognise. I thought that the UK was perhaps more open-minded than that, but maybe it isn't. Track 5 is Epicenter, a much better song, and again, that closes one of the albums. It's track 10 on the Door to the River album on the reissue. It's a really good song, but again, the album doesn't have a core personality. It's really difficult to listen to this album and go, that's what it is, that's how it works, because there isn't really a sense of that. 6 is Baby Eliane, which is inspired by the I think, was it the American Immigration Service's kidnapping a baby called Baby Eliane. And then 7 is Freedom of Speech by Feed My Children, which has guest guitar by Kevin Shields on, and closes the album. CD fans will notice that there is a bonus track on the original CD, We Are All Bourgeois Now, a cover, I think, of McCluskey, but done in a far better recorded fashion than the original, because the original was done cheaply and quickly with not a huge amount of time or money, as indeed much great art is. The band toured. After this, they played a show in Cardiff at the Coal Exchange. Here's a bootleg CD from the days when bands would do bootleg CDs, or bootleggers would do bootleg CDs of bands which broadcast on the radio. They played 6 whole headline shows in the UK, 2 nights at Brixton, 2 nights at Manchester, 2 nights at the Glasgow Barrowlands. I went to the 2 shows at Brixton and Manchester, and the sets were very, very similar. By the time I got to day 4, I was quite bored, to be honest. I was like, well, I've come to Manchester, I've spent a load of money, I haven't necessarily got to see a band that I really love, and they're playing the same songs in the same order and saying the same things between the same songs every single night. I was like, maybe me and the Manics are starting to diverge a little bit, which is exactly, this is the point where me and the Manics started to go in different directions. And that hasn't really changed in the past 20 years. I was quite disappointed by what the Manics have become. They've become just another band. You know, the initial promise that they had started to dissolve a little. There were singles, of course, I've mentioned it before. Ocean Spray. This one is backed with tracks Groundhog Days and Just a Kid. Groundhog Days taking its name and title from the film of the same name, and some of the lyrics bear a resemblance to that. And Just a Kid following on from the theme of Born a Girl on This Is My Truth, kind of being sort of nostalgic but also identifying with the life that has been lost as you grow up. Remixes on this CD, not great remixes on that CD. The European CD single of Ocean Spray, by the way, was backed with Locust Valley and the Ballad of Bangkok Novotel, but also an acoustic version of So Why So Sad, which was recorded for Danish radio in Copenhagen. So Why So Sad, the acoustic version, is absolutely gorgeous. And actually, in some respects, I think maybe this should have been the album version, but of course it was recorded after the song was recorded and released as a single. So there you have it. We had a third single from the album, Let Robeson Sing, which of course I've mentioned previously. And the band did some touring. There were some promos and things like that. Here was the Manic Street Preachers, a collection, a radio play, and a TV synchronization promo CD of hits and remixes from the 6 albums. That was worth a fair bit of money at one point. And then the band brought the period to a close with the last release of the period was this Japanese EP, No Our B-Sides, which features So Why So Sad, Pedestal, Locust Valley, Ballad of the Bangkok Novotel, Groundhog Days, the remix of Ocean Spray, and a track called Little Trolls. Little Trolls was on the cassette single of all the formats, only on the cassette single of Ocean Spray. And it's not a great song, but I didn't buy the cassette of Ocean Spray because I could get No Our B-Sides instead. And of course, Let Robeson Sing was the last single that was released on September the 10th, 2001. Had an exclusive track on the 12-inch called Fear of Motion, and a couple of remixes, one by Felix de Housecat, whoever he is, and one by Ian Brown, who, yes, did that terrible rap about rocking the mic and stuff like that. The period came to a close with 2 releases, well, 2 events. The first one is the release of Louder Than War live in Cuba, the live show that started the album's promotional period. Cuba's Karl Marx Theatre on the 8th of February 2001. This is the last retail DVD that was released by the band. It's okay, it's not amazing, it's more of a novelty factor than anything else, and there's a lot of content on here, but a lot of it is replicating various DVDs and various documentaries and stuff, and there is, you know, the live show that's on Louder Than War has 6 tracks taken off it but are available as TV versions. So if you wanted to hear the bonus live versions of So Why So Sad, Designed for Life, Masses Against the Classes, You Stole the Sun, and Freedom of Speech Won't Feed My Children, you have to go into the extras menu where you get a lower grade audio and video. It's a little bit disappointing, but there you are. The last 2 live shows of the period were at the Reading Festival in 2001. I went to that. And the band changed the set list around a little. They moved some songs about. They added Archives of Pain and the Raw Correspondent and It's So Easy back into the set list. And that was webcast. The webcast was not an amazing quality period, but the last show of the period, which the band played, was at the London Scala on the 12th of September 2001, the day after the 9/11 attacks, and that was a strange, weird gig that was filmed for Channel 4, and I was there. Very recently, the band pushed out a 3 CD and double LP edition of the album, reconfigured, completely remixed from the ground up by Dave Aringa. So let me just say, this is an absolutely essential expanded director's cut edition of Know Your Enemy. The B-sides are reintegrated into the album. The track listing is revised completely. Every song has been remixed by Dave. They've got no different vocal takes or anything like that, apart from the fact that some of the overdubs on Masters Against the Classes have been removed, and some of the slight kind of technical flair has been toned down a little to represent the sound of the bands as opposed to any production tricks. But this is absolutely the definitive essential version of it, and it splits the albums into two halves. One is Door to the River, which is a more kind of relaxed elegiac sequel to This Is My Truth, Tell Me Yours, and then the follow-up, Solidarity, which is that harsh, spiky 12 song rock version of the album that opens with Intravenous Agnostic and has all the serrated buzzsaw edge guitars and sounds that you want. And this really is an absolutely essential purchase if you're a fan of the band and you thought Know Your Enemy was a bit rubbish and would be better as two separate albums. This is the two separate albums there. The CD version, by the way, contains 4 alternate mixes by Tom Lord Alge and the original album mixes on CD1, and several of the B-sides, all of the B-sides I can think of, on CD2. Or some of the B-sides are integrated back into the running order of the album. And CD3 is a selection of studio demos, rehearsals, rough mixes, and things where you get a pretty good coverage of almost the whole album. It's absolutely essential purchase, and it really does rethink the album completely. It's like a brand new Manic's album made out of old bits that you've you know and love, but presented in new frames. Absolutely essential. Absolutely love it. Early purchases from the band's web store came with a signed artwork print here as well, and then you got a double album release. So if you want to get the album on vinyl, I think Know Your Enemy is probably now obsolete, and it is replaced by the this version of it, the director's cut of the album with the Door to the River and the Solidarity albums. That wraps up the period. Thank you very much.